The morning sun filtered through the tall, arched windows of the Dalton County Courthouse, casting golden streaks across the old wooden benches and gleaming marble floor. Located in a quiet town nestled along the edge of northern Georgia, the courthouse stood like a relic of justice from a time gone by, ornate, aged, but respected. Inside, whispers filled the air as townsfolk filed into the courtroom, eager to witness what had been called the biggest trial the county had seen. Over 2 decades. Luis Ortega sat at the defense table, hands cuffed, jaw locked, eyes sharp. He wore a charcoal gray suit ironed too perfectly for a man behind bars and exuded an eerie calm. Ortega wasn't just a suspect. He was the alleged leader of a southern heroin pipeline that stretched from Atlanta to Memphis, a name feared in drug task forces for years. His arrest had rocked the region, and this trial was the culmination of months of work by local and federal authorities. The case was airtight according to prosecutors, but whispers around town suggested otherwise. Presiding over the case was Judge Marshall Hammond, a man whose decades on the bench had earned him both reverence and fear. Hammond was nearing retirement. He was known for his punctuality, his disdain for drama, and his iron grip on courtroom order. His thick silver hair was combed back sharply, his black robe unwrinkled, and his gavel, as many joked, hit harder than most people's fists. Hammond didn't tolerate distractions. And today, with press, politicians, and even a classroom of criminal justice students watching from the gallery, he expected perfection. As the courtroom clock struck 9 a.m., the bailiff called out with practiced authority, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Hammond." Everyone stood. Judge Hammond entered, gave a nod, and sat with a slow exhale. "You may be seated," he sighed, scanning the room with his usual eagle-eyed calm. He glanced briefly toward Ortega, who gave a small, unreadable smile. On the other side of the courtroom, Ada Claire Whitman organized her stack of documents, adjusting her glasses with purpose. She was young but sharp, a star prosecutor in the making. Next to her sat 2 agents, one of whom leaned over and muttered, "Let's hope today goes smoother than last week." Claire didn't respond. She had a feeling this trial wouldn't be smooth at all. The buzz of the room shifted when Officer Diego Ramirez entered through the side doors, holding the leash of his loyal partner, Max, a large, muscular German shepherd with eyes like black glass. The two made an imposing pair. Officer Ramirez was tall, with sleeves rolled up to his elbows and a scar across his right forearm, a mark he once said came from Max during early training. Max had earned a reputation of his own in Dalton County. He'd sniffed out explosives at a bomb threat hoax in a school, uncovered hidden cash in a laundromat drug bust, and once even found a runaway child hiding in the woods during a lightning storm. But this morning, Max was only supposed to be a precaution. "Routine sweep," Ramirez whispered to the bailiff as they entered. "It's part of the protocol for high-profile narcotics trials. D wants added presence." The bailiff nodded, but frowned. "In the courtroom? During proceedings?" Ramirez shrugged. "He won't bark unless he smells something." With that, Max was led toward the gallery, tail wagging lightly, tongue lolling. Most attendees welcomed the brief. Distraction. The students leaned over to get a better look at the K9. One even whispered, "Looks like a real-life action movie." But Ortega didn't smile. As Max approached the defense table, Ortega's body stiffened, not enough to draw attention, but enough for anyone watching closely to notice. Judge Hammond cleared his throat. "Let's begin." The prosecutor stood and began presenting evidence photos, shipping logs, intercepted calls. The jury nodded, eyes focused. It was going smoothly. That is, until Max's head snapped toward the front of the room. It happened so subtly, no one noticed at first. But Officer Ramirez felt the tension in the leash. Max's tail dropped. His nose twitched rapidly. He began sniffing the air, then the floor. He stopped moving completely, his body locked in a stiff stance. Ramirez gently tugged the leash. "Easy," he whispered. Max didn't budge. He stepped forward, closer to the judge's bench. Ramirez followed hesitantly, trying not to draw attention. But Max had entered work mode. His ears pricked, his eyes narrowed, and suddenly he growled. It was low, almost inaudible. But Ramirez knew that sound well. It was Max's warning signal. Judge Hammond noticed. "Officer, is there a problem with your canine?" Ramirez hesitated. "I'm not sure, Your Honor. He's reacting to something." The room hushed. Everyone turned to look. Ortega raised his eyebrows with theatrical interest. Claire Whitman paused her presentation mid-sentence. The gallery leaned forward. Then Max gave a sharp bark once, then again. Loud, commanding, echoing across the stone floor. People gasped. The judge looked down at his bench, then at Ramirez. "Explain," he demanded. Ramirez approached the bench, crouching to Max's level. "He's alerting, sir. He smells something." He looked up, voice serious now. Something beneath. The bench. The courtroom froze. A beat of silence passed. Then chaos erupted. The noise in the courtroom surged like a rising tide. Papers rustled, phones buzzed, whispers multiplied. Even Judge Hammond, normally stoic and composed, looked visibly unnerved. He tapped his gavel once. "Order in the court." He snapped, his voice slicing through the tension. "Everyone stay seated." But no one's attention was on the judge anymore. All eyes were on Max. The German shepherd stood completely still now, his nose pressed against the bottom left corner of the judge's heavy oak bench. His tail, previously relaxed, was stiff and horizontal, a clear sign to Officer Ramirez that Max had locked onto something. Not someone, something. Ramirez knelt beside his partner, placing a hand gently on the dog's shoulder. "Easy, boy," he whispered. "What do you smell?" Max gave a low growl and started sniffing again, more aggressively this time. His body moved in small circles around that corner of the bench, nose pressed to the ground, breath sharp, ears erect. The room watched in total silence, except for the soft scraping sound of Max's paws against the polished wood floor. "Officer Ramirez," Judge Hammond said, more cautiously now, "this is a court of law. If your dog is detecting something dangerous, I suggest you act quickly." "Yes, Your Honor," Ramirez replied, standing. Max's alert behavior is trained and confirmed. He smells narcotics or explosives. That got everyone's attention. "Explosives?" gasped someone from the gallery. Two jurors visibly paled. Claire Whitman moved forward, gripping her notes tightly, whispering something to the bailiff. Luis Ortega's lips curled into a faint smirk as he leaned toward his attorney and whispered something under his breath. The defense lawyer looked irritated and anxious. "Clear the area around the bench," Ramirez instructed, taking full command. "I need space." The judge stood up without argument and stepped aside, retreating down the side stairs of the platform. Two deputies moved in to block off access to the bench. Max barked again, sharper this time, pawing at a lower panel just under where the judge had been seated. Ramirez bent down and examined it closely. The bench had looked solid oak, decades old, carved with classical moldings, but now that he was directly in front of it, Ramirez noticed something odd. The grain of the wood near the base didn't quite match the rest of the bench. It was just slightly off in color, artificially darkened. The edge was clean, too clean. Max was now scratching at that exact spot. Ramirez looked up at the judge. "Permission to inspect this panel?" Hammond nodded. Granted, do what you need to do. Ramirez reached out and pressed along the edges of the wood. His fingers met resistance at first, then gave way. A quiet click, the panel loosened. No screws, no nails. Magnets. The entire courtroom held its breath as Officer Ramirez gently pulled the panel free. The hollow space behind it was just large enough to hold a few items, but what sat inside made his blood run cold. Wrapped in thick duct tape and stacked tightly inside were 5 rectangular packages. Black, with faint smudges of marker scrawled. On them, they looked like bricks thick and solid. Everyone knew what they were. For a long second, no one spoke. Then Ramirez turned toward the gallery, eyes wide, voice low but certain. We have a stash of narcotics, high volume, possibly heroin. The courtroom exploded. A woman in the front row covered her mouth and gasped. The students from this community college looked stunned, some even reaching for their phones, though a deputy barked at them to put them away. One juror leaned against the wall, visibly shaken. Judge Hammond removed his glasses and sat back down heavily in his chair, now removed from the bench that just moments ago had concealed illegal drugs. Luis Ortega was the only one who seemed amused. Ramirez stood with the packages now sealed, in a plastic evidence bag. These were hidden beneath the judge's bench. Whoever placed them there had full access and knowledge of the courtroom's layout. Claire Whitman looked like she had been struck. "Your Honor," she said, breathless. This changes everything. The integrity of this courtroom has been compromised. We need a full investigation." Judge Hammond nodded slowly. "This trial is adjourned until further notice. Bailiff, clear the courtroom and get me the FBI." Luis Ortega laughed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't long, but it was enough to chill the spine of everyone in the room. Outside the courthouse, the scene was chaos. Reporters scrambled, crowds gathered, and yellow police tape sealed the perimeter. The courthouse, that had stood for over a century as a symbol of law and order, now wore the stain of corruption. Inside, Ramirez and Max sat quietly in a small office. Max rested at his handler's feet, tail thumping slowly against the floor. "You did good, boy," Ramirez said, stroking Max's thick fur. "You stopped something real bad today." But even as he spoke, a knot of dread tightened in his gut. Someone had used that bench as a hiding place. That someone had access to the courtroom. And if drugs were hidden in the judge's bench, where else might they be? The courthouse buzzed like a disturbed hive. Outside the sealed courtroom, reporters and locals pressed against the stone walls, trying to peek through narrow windows for any glimpse of what had just unfolded. Inside, officers moved with urgency, clearing jurors, ushering students out, and locking down the perimeter. But at the center of it all, in the still air that remained, was Max, standing tall, his bark echoing in everyone's memory like the crack of thunder before a storm. Officer Ramirez stood beside him, gripping the leash with steady hands, but his thoughts were racing. He'd trained Max for years, through scorching fields, crowded schools, mock airports. Max had never missed a scent. And now, in the heart of justice, he'd found narcotics where no one had thought to look, beneath the judge's bench. "I don't understand how this is even possible," Claire Whitman said, pacing the floor. Her voice was hushed but laced with panic. "That bench has been untouched for years. Who would have had access?" Judge Hammond sat back in a chair off the main floor, visibly shaken. "I'd sat behind that bench every day for 16 years, he muttered. "Are you telling me someone's been hiding bricks of heroin under my feet all this time?" "No, Sir," Ramirez said calmly. "This was recent. Max wouldn't react to old residue. It's fresh." That made it worse. Suddenly, a deputy entered the room with urgency. "Sir," he said to the judge, "we've got a bigger problem." The security camera feed, it's incomplete. Footage from the last 3 nights is missing. Missing? Claire repeated. Stunned. Who deleted it? We're checking logins now, but the system was accessed using admin credentials. Judge Hammond's face darkened. Someone with high-level clearance. The implications hit everyone at once. This wasn't just a sloppy act of desperation from a street-level dealer. This was calculated, clean, inside. Meanwhile, Max continued to pace, tail stiff, ears flicking at every sound. Ramirez noticed the dog's agitation hadn't faded. He knelt beside him, brushing his fur. What is it, boy? You still picking something up? Max gave a short huff, nose low to the floor, and moved again, this time not toward the bench, but toward the wooden divider that separated the court floor from the gallery. He sniffed along the base, pausing near a slim heating vent. Claire, watching him, said, Do you think there's more? Ramirez didn't answer. He was already checking the vent screws. Inside the courtroom, the echoes of the earlier drama still lingered. The empty jury box, the open evidence bag, the disturbed sanctity of the courthouse. Max growled again, low, vibrating. Ramirez stood quickly. Get the bomb squad in here now, he ordered. We're not assuming anything else is harmless. Within 45 minutes, a small specialized team from the Atlanta bomb unit arrived and swept the entire courtroom, using advanced chemical sensors and robotics. Their conclusion shocked everyone further. No explosives, but multiple traces of powdered narcotics in 3 different locations. One was beneath the bench. One was inside the vent. And the third? Inside a courtroom storage closet used only by staff. This is organized, one of the bomb technicians said to Claire. This isn't a one-time stash. This is part of a system. Claire stared at the technician, stunned. You mean someone's been using the courtroom like a storage unit? Not just storage, Ramirez added, his face grim. Distribution, maybe. Temporary holding. Maybe even a pass-off zone between cartel runners. It was a terrifying realization. For years, Dalton County had prided itself on being a safe community, where the worst crime usually involved stolen mailboxes or bar fights during Friday night football games. But this? Drugs hidden beneath a federal judge in the middle of a trial against a known drug kingpin? This was corruption at a level they weren't prepared for. By late afternoon, the FBI arrived. A 4-person team in dark suits moved through the courthouse with quiet intensity. They examined every inch of the courtroom, questioned each officer on duty, and pulled digital records from the courthouse servers. Max had become a quiet hero among them. Even FBI agents patted his head with reluctant admiration. That dog just blew open a case we didn't even know existed, one agent whispered. Ramirez stayed close to Max, not just because they were partners, but because Max's alert had shifted the course of everything. What was once a sealed, confident case against Ortega had now become a broader mystery, one that might not end with the cartel leader on trial, but somewhere deeper in the walls of the very institution meant to uphold justice. Luis Ortega was escorted back to his holding cell, hands cuffed, smirking. In the hallway, Claire walked beside the judge, her hands clenched. I don't like that look on Ortega's face, she said. He knows more than he's letting on, Hammond replied. Or he planned this from the beginning, Claire added. Hide heroin under the judge's bench, get caught, claim mistrial, argue the entire court was compromised. Do you think he planted it himself? Hammond asked. Claire shook her head. No, he's too high up. But someone on his payroll did. Someone in here. The judge looked around slowly, as if seeing his own building for the first time. We need to root this out completely. I won't allow this court to be used like that again. Claire nodded. We'll find them. All of them. Back in the evidence room, the 5 bricks found under the bench were being tested. The initial field tests were correct. Pure heroin, high grade, nearly uncut. Street value? Over $450,000. Whoever had hidden, it wasn't just trying to sneak a few grams. This was business. Serious, deadly business. And it was now clear that the trial against Luis Ortega wasn't the end of a cartel operation. It was just the beginning of the exposure. The evidence room at the Dalton County Courthouse had never felt this important. A glass table in the center now held 5 neatly packaged bricks of heroin, each one sealed inside an FBI evidence bag, labeled and tagged. The agents wore gloves, speaking in calm, professional tones, but tension crackled in the air. These bricks weren't just contraband, they were messages. Messages left in the most sacred place of the law. Claire Whitman stood by the observation glass, arms crossed. Her mind buzzed with questions. Who had the access? Who had the nerve? Who had the keys? "You've got to see this." Agent Miles from the FBI called over, holding one of the evidence bags up to the light. "Take a closer look at the packaging." Claire stepped forward. At first glance, it was the usual black duct tape. Tightly wound, vacuum sealed, but then she saw it. A tiny silver stamp, barely visible under the light. An insignia shaped like a cobra. Claire's eyes widened. "That's not just a random seal," she muttered. "That's a cartel brand." Miles nodded. Cobra 6. They're a branch of the Ortega network operating out of New Orleans. They usually run through truck stops and docks. They've never placed a package this far inland before. Especially not ... here. In a courtroom, Claire whispered. She looked at Ramirez, who was now standing beside her. Max sat obediently. At his feet, alert but calm. "This goes beyond Ortega," Ramirez said quietly. "This is a different game. Bigger players." Claire nodded. "And it's happening right under our noses." Meanwhile, back in Judge Hammond's chambers, he stood alone at the window, overlooking the quiet town square. He watched as police tape fluttered in the breeze around the courthouse steps, the scene outside resembling something out of a crime documentary. His hand trembled slightly as he sipped cold coffee. He dedicated his life to justice. 27 years behind the bench, thousands of cases, and now this? Someone had turned his courtroom into a drug den. The thought made him feel violated, humiliated, and enraged all at once. There was a soft knock. "Come in," he called, straightening his robe. Deputy Carter entered. "Sir, we finished dusting the bench. We pulled 3 full sets of prints. 2 matched known employees, including yours." "Expected." Hammond nodded. "But the 3rd, Carter said, hesitating. "We ran it through the state and federal databases. It's a match." "To who?" Carter swallowed. "Clyde Monroe, the night janitor." Hammond's brow furrowed. "He's worked here for almost a decade." "Yes, sir. But 2 months ago, he suddenly bought a new car, paid in cash. Rumor is he moved his sister into a better neighborhood and dropped 50 grand on home renovations." Hammond clenched his jaw. "And nobody thought to question that?" "We're questioning it now," Carter said. "We're bringing him in." Within hours, Clyde Monroe was sitting in a cold interrogation room at the sheriff's department. A bulky man in his late 40s, Monroe looked nervous but not surprised. He didn't deny the prints. He didn't even ask for a lawyer right away. He just sat there, eyes on the table. "I didn't mean to hurt nobody," he finally said, voice raspy. "I was just the runner, that's all." Agent Miles raised an eyebrow. "The runner?" Monroe nodded. "They gave me a package. Said I just needed to stash it. One night a week, they tell me where to hide it. Said someone would come by and collect. That's all I did." "Who's they?" Monroe hesitated. Your prints are on heroin found in a judge's bench, Clyde. You're going away for a long time, unless you give us a name. Monroe sighed and looked up. I don't know his real name. We called him Ghost. Never saw his face. Just gloves, hood, and a burner phone. He dropped the bricks off near the loading dock at midnight. Agent Miles leaned in. And what about the surveillance system? Who wiped the footage? Monroe looked down. Not me. Then who? He hesitated again. Someone gave Ghost the logins. Said there was help from the inside. Said we had friends in robes and badges. Back at the courthouse, Claire was piecing it together on a whiteboard, drawing lines between photos of Monroe, Ortega, and other suspects tied to the Cobra 6 cartel. A janitor can't delete security footage, she said to Ramirez, and he doesn't have courtroom keys. Someone gave him access. You think Ortega's team got to a staff member? I think it's worse than that, Claire muttered. What if someone in law enforcement is part of this network? Ramirez's expression darkened. Just then, an assistant entered. Ma'am, you need to see this. Claire followed her to the surveillance archive room. A technician pointed to a new file uncovered in the backup drive. These were hidden, encrypted. But we cracked one segment. The footage showed the night before the trial. Dim lighting. Time-stamped 2:43 a.m. A shadowy figure entered through a staff-only entrance, carried a duffel bag, and moved directly toward the judge's bench. They knelt, removed the magnetic panel, and placed the heroin bricks inside. The figure wore gloves and a hood. But then, a glint of something metal. Pause it, Claire said. The tech froze the frame. On the figure's wrist, just visible for a moment, was a badge chain, one with a Dalton County deputy badge attached to it. Ramirez took a step back. No way, Claire's heart pounded. Get the roster. Every deputy who had key access. That night, cross-check their logs. I want them all brought in. By nightfall, arrest warrants were being drafted. The operation was no longer a local investigation. It was now part of a federal anti-corruption probe. Judge Hammond gave the FBI full clearance to dig through every inch of courthouse records, including personnel files. Luis Ortega had stayed, silent in his cell all day, not angry, not worried, just waiting. As Claire stood outside the courthouse with Max beside her, the dog sat still, staring into the streetlights. A breeze stirred his fur. Claire looked down at him and smiled faintly. You knew before any of us did, didn't you? She whispered. Max gave a short huff. And in that moment, it was clear. This case wasn't just about bricks of heroin. It was about betrayal. It was about a system cracked from the inside. And it was far from over. The Dalton County Courthouse, once a symbol of sleepy Southern justice, had become the epicenter of a scandal no one could have predicted. Flashing red and blue lights painted the courthouse walls as night fell. FBI vans, sheriff cruisers, and news trucks crowded the narrow streets. What had begun as a routine trial had unraveled into a tangled conspiracy that shook the very foundation of the judicial system. Inside the courthouse, the once orderly atmosphere had descended into barely contained chaos. Phones rang nonstop. Deputies were interviewed one by one. A wall in the investigation room was now filled with pinned photos, string lines, and evidence tags, a map of betrayal. The townspeople, watching the breaking news live on local TV, were stunned. How could a place built to deliver justice become a vessel for organized crime? In a private room, Judge Hammond sat with Claire Whitman and Agent Miles. The air was thick. Hammond's eyes were bloodshot, his voice gravelly. You're telling me someone wearing my badge helped smuggle drugs into my courtroom? Miles didn't sugarcoat it. Yes, sir. One of your own deputies. Possibly more. Claire added, We're currently cross-checking keycard entries. Anyone who accessed the building after hours without official clearance is being flagged. The judge leaned back and removed his glasses. And Ortega? Still silent, Claire said. But it's not silence out of fear. It's strategy. He wants us to know this goes deeper. And he knows we're only beginning to pull the thread. The room fell quiet. Then Miles broke it. Monroe gave up a name. Both Claire and Hammond turned sharply. Who? Miles. Pulled out a file. Marcus Delroy, veteran bailiff. Served 14 years in this building. No criminal history. But Monroe says Delroy gave him keys to restricted rooms and warned him about upcoming sweeps. Claire's mind reeled. I've worked next to Marcus for years. He volunteers at the youth center. He's a trusted figure in this building. Maybe too trusted, Miles said grimly. Downstairs, Officer Ramirez stood with Max in the quiet corridor outside holding cells. Max had become a local legend overnight. News outlets had already dubbed him the dog who sniffed out the snake. But Ramirez didn't feel triumphant, not even close. He looked at Ortega through the glass, calm, composed, and oddly satisfied. I bet you think this is all a win for you, Ramirez muttered. Ortega just smirked. I told you people before. Justice is only as clean as the hands that hold it. Ramirez narrowed his eyes. You've got a cartel on life support. The FBI is crawling through your network. You're done, Ortega chuckled. No, officer. I'm just the noise. The real players don't sit in cells. The words lingered long after Ramirez walked away. Elsewhere, Marcus Delroy was quietly brought into an interview room. He didn't resist, didn't even ask why. He just looked tired. Claire entered with Agent Miles. Marcus glanced at the two of them, then sighed. Guess it was only a matter of time. Claire sat down slowly. I want to believe this is a mistake. Marcus. But your security codes were used. Monroe says you handed him access. Delroy nodded, slow and resigned. I did. Claire felt her stomach drop. Miles kept his voice even. Why? Marcus leaned back and looked at the ceiling. My wife's cancer treatment was bleeding us dry. We sold the house, moved in with my sister. I still couldn't keep up. Then this man came to me, said he knew about my bills, said he could make it go away. Claire clenched her fists. So, you sold out the court? Marcus looked down, eyes rimmed with guilt. I thought, if I just let them use the space a few times, no one would get hurt. No weapons, just packages? I didn't know it'd go this far. You knew Ortega was on trial. You let his people plant heroin under the judge, Claire said, voice cracking. Marcus looked away. I'm sorry. News of Marcus's confession spread fast. His mugshot hit TV screens and front pages by morning. Dalton was shaken to its core. If a man like Marcus Delroy, a respected bailiff, a community leader, could be bought, then who else? Rumors swirled. Some said even the DA's office had leaks. Others believed Ortega's cartel had eyes in the police department itself. In the investigation room, Agent Miles circled a red marker around two new names connected to the Cobra 6 cartel. We traced a shipment from New Orleans to Dalton. The logs were altered. Someone inside the transport department rerouted them. Under false IDs. Claire stared at the board. So this wasn't a fluke. It was an operation. Systematic. Strategic. Ramirez stepped in. You said Ortega's cartel isn't the end of it. Who's above him? Miles nodded. There's a theory. Cobra 6 doesn't operate independently. They're a franchise. Claire blinked. A cartel with franchises? Think bigger than one kingpin, Miles said. Think infrastructure. Hidden leadership. Ortega might not be the boss. He's just middle management. That night, Judge Hammond called an emergency press conference. Standing at the courthouse steps under harsh lights and facing dozens of microphones, he addressed the stunned town. "Ladies and gentlemen of Dalton County," he began, voice solemn but firm. "This courthouse, like many across America, was built to represent the rule of law. But as you've seen, even sacred places can be corrupted when good people look the other way, or worse, take part. We are uncovering rot in our own house." He paused, "But let me be clear, this court will not fall. Justice will not be bought. And those who have stained this institution will face the very law they tried to undermine." The crowd broke into cautious applause. But under the claps, there was unease, suspicion, a realization that nothing, no courtroom, no badge, no robe, was immune. Back inside, Max lay near Ramirez's desk, resting his head between his paws. But his ears twitched with every sound. Ramirez knelt and rubbed his fur. "We're not done yet," he whispered. Outside, somewhere in the dark, the rest of the network watched, waiting. Because one trial had been cracked open, and the entire justice system was now on trial. The air in Dalton County had changed. Whispers lingered like a fog in every hallway of the courthouse. Staff walked on eggshells. Eyes that once looked familiar now held suspicion. After bailiff Marcus Delroy's confession, everyone was asking the same haunting question. How many more had sold out? Agent Claire Whitman, now heading the federal task force, stood before a large corkboard plastered with photos, pins, and notes. Her eyes were locked on a timeline stretching back 6 months. That's when the patterns began missing court footage. Nighttime deliveries logged under fake IDs and odd janitorial staff rotations. Delroy wasn't the only one, Claire muttered. "No," said Agent Miles, stepping into the room with a fresh folder. "And we just confirmed it." He dropped the file on the table. Claire opened it. Inside were surveillance stills of courthouse janitor Clyde Monroe. At first glance, Clyde looked harmless. 60 years old, quiet, a man who kept his head down and floors spotless. But one image stood out, Clyde handing a wrapped parcel to a man behind the parking garage. The timestamp matched the day before Ortega's trial began. Claire stared at it, then whispered, "Gotcha." 3 hours later, FBI agents swarmed Monroe's apartment. It was modest, filled with old furniture, worn rugs, and dusty shelves. Clyde didn't resist. In fact, he looked almost relieved. "You know why we're here?" Claire asked as he sat across from her at HQ. He nodded, eyes watery. "I do. You planted heroin under the judge's bench?" "Yes," he said quietly. "I didn't know that's what it was at first. Just said it was evidence needing safekeeping. They paid me to hide it during cleaning shifts." "Who are they?" Claire pushed. "Different men, always in black SUVs. I never asked their names." Claire leaned in. "Did you work alone?" Clyde hesitated. "No, someone gave me access." Her heart pounded. "Who?" He took a shaky breath. "Intern, DA's office. Name's Jeremy Slade." Jeremy Slade was fresh out of law school, barely 27, with a resume that screamed ambition. He wore polished shoes, sharp suits, and flashed a perfect smile in every courtroom. But underneath the charm was a rot no one saw coming. By noon, agents raided Jeremy's apartment. Hidden behind his bookshelf, they found burner phones, encrypted USB drives, and $78,000 in cash. When confronted, Jeremy laughed. "Took you long enough." Claire stepped into the room. "You had access to the DA's records," she said. "You deleted surveillance footage, altered entry logs, gave Monroe the schedule." "Why?" Jeremy leaned back smugly. Because it was easy. You people are so concerned with appearances, press conferences, client suits, courtroom etiquette. You never check what's under the floorboards. He tapped his head. You build a house of law, but never reinforce the foundation. Back at the courthouse, Judge Hammond held an emergency staff meeting. His voice trembled with fatigue and frustration. 3 of our own, 1 janitor, 1 bailiff, and now an intern sold out this institution. The room was silent. I don't know how far this goes, but we're not going to hide it. We're going to root it out. Every courtroom, every hallway. Until we can say without doubt, we serve justice, not cartels. A round of tense nods followed. That night, Claire, Miles, and Ramirez sat in the FBI war room, surrounded by evidence bags and mugshots. Miles said, "We have enough to reopen over a dozen cases connected to Ortega's network. These insiders may have tampered with more than just this trial." Claire rubbed her temples. "We're not dealing with a gang. This is a system. An entire machine powered by money, silence, and fear." She looked up at Ramirez. "Max saved us from walking into this blind. That dog exposed a conspiracy the rest of us missed." Ramirez smiled faintly. "And he only needed his nose." Across town, Ortega sat calmly in his holding cell. He knew the FBI had turned the tide. His insiders were collapsing. The network was bleeding. But still, he smiled. Because Ortega never built his cartel to be visible. He built it to be replaced. For every Monroe, there was another willing janitor. For every Slade, another hungry intern. Justice could win a battle, but cartels, they built for the long game. In Washington, the Department of Justice issued a national advisory. All federal and state courts were to conduct immediate internal audits, increase canine sweep frequency, and investigate unauthorized surveillance gaps. Dalton County had become a warning. The headlines read, "The Courtroom Cartel, Inside America's New Legal Crisis." 2 days later, a courtroom security camera captured an emotional moment. Max, the K9, returning to the courtroom where it all began. Ramirez walked beside him, but this time, Max wasn't sniffing. He simply walked to the judge's bench and sat down. The courtroom stood still. Judge Hammond looked down at him, smiled, and whispered, "Thank you, officer." Claire stood at the top of the courthouse steps, staring out at the town below. What started with one dog's instincts had uncovered a conspiracy that shook the nation. But Claire knew the war wasn't over. "You really think we got them all?" Miles asked, stepping beside her. "No," Claire said. "But we got enough to send a message." She looked toward the horizon. "And that's how you start a revolution." The concrete walls of the federal detention center were thick, cold, and supposedly impenetrable. Luis Ortega sat calmly in his private cell, flipping through a paperback novel, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. The irony amused him. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't angry. He was patient. Through the narrow window, the sun dipped low over Dalton County. The sky looked like a painting calm, innocent. Just like the town pretended to be. Ortega knew better. He had lived in places like this all his life. Towns that looked honest, but sold their integrity by the pound. His time in that courtroom had ended, but his reach hadn't. And tonight, the counterattack would begin. Back at the task force HQ, Agent Claire Whitman barely sipped her lukewarm coffee. Her eyes were bloodshot, her blouse wrinkled. Miles leaned over her shoulder, reviewing a new data sheet. 3 more arrests today, he said. 2 paralegals. And 1 junior prosecutor, all connected to Ortega through bank records. Claire exhaled. That brings us to 14 total insiders. Ramirez entered, Max close behind. The German shepherd looked alert, ears high, eyes scanning. Claire greeted him with a tired smile. "He's still sniffing every doorway, huh?" Ramirez nodded. Since day one. It's like he knows the threat isn't over. Miles pointed to the map on the wall. Because it's not. He drew a red circle around a warehouse district just outside Dalton. This place, we've been watching it for weeks. Deliveries in and out at night. Zero paperwork. And no registered leaseholders. Claire leaned in. You think it's Ortega's fallback? Miles nodded. Tonight, we find out. Under the cover of night, 2 black SUVs rolled into position near the warehouse. FBI tactical teams surrounded the building silently. Drones hovered overhead. Claire, Ramirez, and Max stood behind a steel fence, waiting for the green light. Ready? Claire asked. Ramirez gave Max a signal. The dog crouched low, focused. Every muscle coiled like a spring. They moved in. The warehouse looked abandoned. Rusted siding, shattered windows, a broken sign that once said Bellman Logistics. But inside, it was a different world. Surveillance cameras, high-tech radio equipment, stacked crates labeled medical supplies, but filled with cash, narcotics, burner phones, even judge robes and court stamps. Bingo, Miles whispered. Suddenly a gunshot. Claire ducked. Team Bravo report. Radio static. More shots echoed from the second floor. Ramirez shielded Max behind a stack of crates. They knew we were coming. Claire barked into her radio. Suspects on site. Repeat suspects on site. Within seconds, the warehouse erupted into chaos. Armed guards in black masks exchanged. Fire with agents. It was an ambush. Ortega hadn't just anticipated this move, he had orchestrated it. Meanwhile, miles away in the federal prison, Ortega watched the clock tick past midnight. At exactly 12:01 a.m., a guard past his cell nodded and continued walking. Ortega smiled. The signal was clear. The warehouse had been sacrificed. His soldiers had been told to make noise, draw attention, and fall, because the real prize was elsewhere. Back at the courthouse abandoned for the night, a lone maintenance truck pulled up to the service entrance. A man in a county uniform swiped a stolen access card. The door buzzed open. He stepped inside, wheeling a trash bin that didn't clatter like trash at all. In the bin, wrapped in blackout tarp, sat a bomb. At FBI HQ, Claire received the alert. Unauthorized access at Dalton Courthouse, an agent shouted. Live security feed just went dark. Claire's eyes widened. Send every available unit. Ramirez grabbed Max's leash. Let's go. They sped through downtown, lights flashing, heartbeats pounding. At the courthouse, the man was gone. The trash bin sat quietly at the foot of Judge Hammond's bench, eerily similar to the first time Max had alerted. Claire and Ramirez entered. First, weapons drawn. Max sprinted forward and froze. He barked, one sharp bark, then growled. Ramirez dropped to one knee. Same signal. There's something deadly here. Claire scanned the area. Where's the custodian team? Gone. Building's been empty since 9 p.m. They opened the bin. A black box. Digital timer. 3 minutes left. Claire's mouth went dry. We have a bomb. Miles radioed in. Evac protocols. Initiated. Bomb squad en route. Claire stared at the timer. 2:42, 2:41. Ramirez looked at her. We don't have time. Back at the prison, Ortega leaned back on his cot, staring at the ceiling. He pictured it. Headlines, panic, federal courts in disarray. He had lost a trial, but now the system itself would burn. Inside the courthouse, Claire turned to Ramirez. If we wait, we risk everything. But if we move it... Ramirez shook his head. Too risky. Max barked again and began tugging Ramirez's pant leg. The dog sprinted toward the rear exit. Claire blinked. He wants us to follow. Ramirez grabbed the bin. Together, they chased Max through the hallway, out the rear loading dock, across the alley and toward the fountain in Civic Plaza. Claire saw it a concrete barrier. "Drop it there." Ramirez heaved the bin behind the wall and dove. The explosion hit like a thunderclap, hot, sharp, violent. But the courthouse stood, and Max still standing, tail wagging. Claire lay on her back, gasping. Ramirez grinned. "I'm filing that under Hero Dog Saves Town again." Claire looked at Max, then the sky. "We were never fighting. Just Ortega," she said. "We were fighting the idea that justice could be bought, buried, or blown apart." Max barked once. Loud, clear, final. In a prison cell, Ortega heard the news minutes later. His guard entered, face pale. They found the bomb. The dog saved them. For the first time, Ortega's smirk faltered. He whispered, "The dog again." The sun rose over Dalton County with an uneasy calm. The courthouse stood battered but unbroken, a silent sentinel after the chaos of the night before. News cameras swarmed the steps, broadcasting live updates to a nation watching in suspense. Justice, it seemed, was under siege, and the whole country was holding its breath. Inside, Judge Hammond sat quietly in his chambers, hands folded on his desk. The weight of weeks, no, months, of turmoil pressed down on him. He glanced at a photo on his desk, a young law student, his daughter, smiling brightly. He promised himself this nightmare would end, for her, for the community, for the very idea of justice. Agent Claire Whitman paced outside the courtroom, reviewing the files one last time. The arrests, the confessions, the raid on the warehouse, and the explosive attempt to destroy the courthouse, it all had led here. Luis Ortega, his corrupt network, and the insiders who had betrayed their oaths were finally facing reckoning. Ramirez stood nearby, Max resting calmly at his feet. The dog's steady gaze was a quiet reminder that sometimes justice came on. 4 legs and a keen nose. The courtroom was packed, not with the usual spectators, but with law enforcement officers, federal agents, local officials, and journalists. The trial to finally bring down the cartel kingpin and expose the rotten core inside the courthouse was about to begin. Ortega, now gaunt and subdued, sat shackled at the defendant's table. His confident smirk was gone, replaced by a thin veil of uncertainty. He knew this wasn't just a trial of his crimes. It was a test of the justice system itself. Claire sat among the prosecutors, ready to present the mountain of evidence that had come from the K-9 that started it all. Judge Hammond took his place, his voice steady and resolute. "This court will hear the charges against Luis Ortega and his co-conspirators," he announced. "May truth and justice prevail." The prosecution laid out a damning case. Testimonies from Marcus Delroy, Clyde Monroe, and Jeremy Slade detailed the insidious web of corruption that had infiltrated the courthouse. The intercepted communications and financial trails painted a picture of a sprawling cartel using the courthouse as a hub to smuggle drugs, alter evidence, and intimidate witnesses. Each piece of evidence was carefully introduced: the harrowing bricks Max had found, the deleted surveillance footage, the secret shipments, and the bomb plot intended to silence the court. The defense tried to undermine the witnesses, but the weight of truth was overwhelming. During cross-examination, Claire asked Max's handler Ramirez to describe the dog's discovery. Ramirez spoke with calm certainty. Max is trained to detect narcotics and explosives. His alert on the judge's bench was the first indication of the conspiracy. Without him, we might still be blind to this network. Max sat proudly beside Ramirez, tail wagging as if understanding the praise. The trial stretched over weeks, but the community followed every update with bated breath. Slowly, the truth emerged, not just about Ortega, but about the vulnerabilities in the system and the courage it took to confront them. At the trial's end, the jury deliberated less than a day before returning a unanimous verdict: guilty. Ortega and his co-conspirators were sentenced to life imprisonment, with no possibility of parole. But the final judgment was more than just a legal victory. Judge Hammond stood before the courtroom one last time after the verdict. "We have faced a darkness that threatened to consume our courthouse, our symbol of fairness and justice. But through the bravery of officers, agents, and even one extraordinary dog, we have reclaimed our institution." He looked at Max, who wagged his tail in acknowledgement. Let this be a reminder. Vigilance and integrity are the cornerstones of justice. And sometimes heroes come in unexpected forms. Outside, the crowd erupted in applause. Claire and Ramirez exchanged a quiet smile. Max barked once, strong and clear, a final salute. Weeks later, Dalton County invested in new security protocols, advanced surveillance, and increased K-9 units. The scandal became a catalyst for nationwide reforms. One quiet afternoon, Claire walked into the courthouse lobby with Max trotting beside her. The building felt different now, cleaner, safer, reborn. She knelt and whispered to Max, "You saved more than a trial, buddy. You saved hope." Max looked up, eyes bright and loyal. And for the first time in a long while, Claire believed that justice, though fragile, would endure.